I'm going to just try to straighten out this so it's not so crooked. Alrighty. So obviously seeds are an advantage over not having seeds because there's less of a reliance on water. And I mentioned last time that the seed is almost like a lunchbox because it's protecting the embryo and there's nourishment. Okay, and the domestication of seed plants began about 8,000 years ago. So here's a fossil of an early seed. Okay, some of these trends, I mentioned these before, the reduced gametophytes, so now the sporophyte is the dominant stage. Heterospory, meaning that there are two separate spores. The ovules, those ovules contain the spores, which will then develop into eggs. And then the pollen, which is the packaging for plant sperm. Okay. So this is showing you a simple moss over here. And here, this is just like my fantastic picture. Here the sporophyte is dependent upon the gametophyte. So here the gametophyte is enlarged. Okay, in ferns and other similar plants, the gametophyte is independent. Okay, this is our fern, prothallus, and here's our sporophyte. And then with our gymnosperms and angiosperms, our sporophyte is dominant, and here are the cones or experts on those. So I wanted to show you, so this is just an extreme close-up of what we would see, okay, on the cone. You see the spore. Okay. We have our megasporangium or megaspore mother cells that produce the megaspores. They're protected by an integument. The opening is known as a micropyle, and the pollen grain would go through the micropyle. In the video, they just called it an opening, but there it is. Okay. And then, of course, when fertilization occurs, that's due to the action of the pollen tube that's going to discharge the sperm. It'll fertilize the egg. And because plants are embryophytes, the embryo is retained within the parent. And then here is showing you the embryo, and there's a food supply, and it's packaged nicely in a seed coat. So there are different types of gymnosperms. This is an example of a cicad, CYCAD. They have like these large leaves. The gingophytes are another type of gymnosperm, and some people take ginkgo biloba for their memory. You might have seen that. Apparently the female plants smell, so the male ones are the ones that are cultivated. And then these are different netophytes. Okay, and so I think we had a ephedra in a jar last time. So that's a gymnosperm. People take this for energy. Welwitschia, they have the broad strapping leaves, and I think that there's a picture of this in your book. Yeah, nano, etc. So there's some diversity to the appearance of gymnosperms, but we're most familiar with the conifers, you know, which would be our pine trees. Okay. Fantastic. I don't know if this will work, but let's see. I'm going to allow it.
Gymnosperms are seed plants that have no enclosed chambers around their seeds. Most gymnosperms are conifers, cone-bearing trees such as the pine shown here. The male and female parts of a conifer are found in separate locations and structures on the tree. A pine tree represents the diploid sporophyte phase of the life cycle. Haploid male and female gametophytes develop in cones on adult sporophytes. Gametophytes produce eggs and sperm. Pollination brings gametophytes together, and an egg is fertilized. The fertilized egg develops into an embryo, protected and nourished within a seed. The seed germinates and grows into an adult sporophyte, completing the pine life cycle.
Hopefully everyone's clear on sporophytes versus gametophytes at this stage. I should mention it takes nearly 3 years from cone production to the mature seed. Okay, this is just breaking it up, and I think there's a nice little picture in your book. very familiar with the flower structure. Be prepared to identify parts of the flower. Exam. Let's take a look at fruit development.
When seeds are mature enough, the ovaries change their function and develop into seed-dispersing structures called fruits. There are many patterns of fruit development, depending on the number of carpels, ovaries, and flowers that form one fruit. Fruits can also be divided into the categories of dry fruits and fleshy fruits. In dry fruits, the ovary dries out at maturity. It may develop hooks that catch animal fur, as in this example, or the ovary and other flower parts may form a wing or parasol or hairs to catch the wind. Sometimes the dry ovary builds tensions that, when released, will shoot the seeds into the air. In fleshy fruits such as tomatoes and peaches, the outer tissues of the ovary thicken and become soft, sweet, and brightly colored. Fleshy fruits invite animal dispersal. The seeds are ingested and, if they escape digestion, they are excreted with fertilizer, hopefully in a choice location.
Have you seen fruit before? How cute. So this is showing you the life cycle of the flowering plant. Okay, basically the anther, which is male, is going to have the microspore mother cells or the microsporangia that produce the microsporocytes, which will undergo meiosis to form microspores, which will develop into generative cells and tube cells. The tube cell is going to grow down the style. The generative cell is going to split, okay, to form two sperm. Okay, there's going to be double fertilization, as you saw, and one is going to fertilize the egg, and the other is going to fertilize those two polar nuclei, okay, to form a triploid endosperm, which is going to be the seed. Okay, females, you have the megaspore mother cells or the megasporangium that's going to divide by meiosis to form the megaspores. Only one will survive. There are like 7 cells inside the embryo sac, which is the gametophyte, and the egg gets fertilized, as do the other 2 cells. Okay. And there's an alternation between haploid and diploid stages.
The function of flowering is to produce seeds and disperse them to locations where the young plants are likely to survive. At each step, there is an emphasis on protecting the offspring. This activity reviews some of the most important steps. Events in seed formation begin with pollination, in which wind or animals bring pollen to the flower. The growth of pollen tubes cause the flower to discard its colorful parts, petals and stamen. After pollen arrives, the bright petals are a hazard. They attract animals that might eat the delicate young fruit. We've enlarged the ovary and sliced it open. An ovary contains 1 or more ovules that will become seeds if they are fertilized. One ovule is shown here, with the front removed to reveal its parts. The ovule is attached to the ovary wall by a stalk that provides nutrients. Starting from a pollen grain at the stigma, which is not shown, a pollen tube grows down through the carpel to the ovule. It carries 2 sperm that enter the ovule. One sperm fuses with the egg cell to make a zygote, which is the first cell of the embryo. The other sperm fuses with the 2 nuclei in the central cell, making a triploid nucleus. The triploid cell will grow and divide to make a food-storing tissue, the endosperm. This ovule has been fertilized and will become a seed. Each of its cells contains 1 or more sets of chromosomes, but the number of sets of chromosomes differs among the parts of the ovule. Double fertilization converts the large central cell from diploid to triploid, while the egg becomes a diploid zygote. The surrounding integuments remain diploid as they were before fertilization. The embryo is a young plant that grows from the zygote, while the large central cell grows into food-storing endosperm. All this is enclosed within a protective seed coat that grows from the integuments around the ovule.
Taking food through its stalk, the developing seed expands its endosperm and embryo. When the embryo is mature and dormant, the integuments develop into a protective seed coat and detach from the ovary wall.
The main axis of the embryo has a root apex and a short stem that may have a few tiny leaves, not shown here, near the shoot apex. The cotyledons are part of the embryo. They're the first leaves. Monocots have one cotyledon. Eudicots have two.
So I mentioned monocots versus dicots. These are some examples of monocots: the orchid or the lily. Most are dicots or eudicots. Most of the, like zucchini, poppies, etc. Now there are also some other plants. Hold on a second. Which are known as basal angiosperms. They're more simple. The water lily, the star anise, etc. Alright, so I went through some differences between monocots and dicots today, like the cotyledon, the venation, the appearance of the stems, the roots. Oh, I didn't go through fibrous versus taproot, but I think you did that in Bio 3. There are differences in the openings and pollen grades. One pollen grade in monocots, 3 in dicots.
Can you go through the roots?
Can you what?
Can you go and like explain the roots when you said the...
Oh, you think of a carrot. Carrot is a taproot. That's a taproot. And you see that in dicots. And then the fibrous groups have many smaller branches. And so things like grass has that.
And what exactly is a cotyledon?
A seed leaf. A seed leaf. And they showed you in the video and also in the formation of the seed leaf. It's what gives rise to the leaf. So whether there's one or two. And obviously we need plants that produce lots of things for us. Is there anything you want to see on like fungi or anything or rodents, or you want to just get the party started with lab? Get the party started.
Show us.
Okay, so as I mentioned,